Well, good afternoon, and I'd like to introduce Ron Gibson again. This is I believe, our seventh interview on constitutional law. And Ron is in Oregon, and he is holding us strongly to our educational knowledge of how we become more empowered and assert our sovereign rights. So welcome, Ron. Thank you very
Thank,
much.
thank you, Kathleen. It's always a pleasure to be on your program here, and I hope that the information that I try to share is a benefit to your listening audience because it's all important. You may not think so at the time, but in a matter of time, you'll see the relevance of it. So, having said that, why, let's get on with our program.
Okay, well, last interview, we talked about the power of the sheriff, and you've indicated that you would like to add some to that. And I have some more information too. So let's go forward since this is a real-time issue. And thank you, Ron.
Well, you're welcome. And for those of you in the listening audience, we have a very distorted, for the most part, view of what our sheriff is to do. Most of us want him to do right, but there's a tremendous amount of political pressure that's put on a sheriff, which should never be the case. Now, let me give you a prime example. I have a very good friend of mine who was a former sheriff in a neighboring county several years back. And he spent probably 70, maybe 80% of his time trying to be able to fund the sheriff's office. That should never be, because if we want protection, then we need to be willing to pay for that. And there's a whole lot of the county budgets all across this land that are nothing but garbage, that they spend money on stuff they should never, because our protective covenant, that being the sheriff's office primarily, should be number one in relative to what we're willing to support and defend and support. And the sheriffs are out there, many of them, and I'm not throwing stones at them at all here, but I think it's really important that we put pressure on our county elected officials to make a budget priority first for the sheriff's department, and the other add-on garbage to be added or deleted down the line. Instead, the sheriff's office is left out there just to fend on his own. And in the county that I'm talking about, they were even charging the sheriff's department money for rent for the building in the county courthouse. And I'm going, wait a minute, what's wrong with this picture? It's pathetic. And so all I'm saying is that if we want our sheriff to do a better job, then we need to stand up and put some pressure on the places where the money is. And I'm going to say this, and you may throw rocks at me, but make a personal donation to the sheriff's office sometimes when you can, as a goodwill gesture to let him know that you're there to support him and whatever. Now, having said that, there is a tremendous obligation of the position of a sheriff. He's caught between the element of crime and the element of politics. And that's a horrible mix on its best day. So, having said that, then most sheriffs do not know the law. The majority of them know statutes and codes. And you probably have heard me say this before. Statutes and codes are not law. Statutes and codes are corporate rules and regulations. And the sheriff is not supposed to be, because he's elected in a constitutional capacity. He's elected by we the people. And we the people are his boss, not the court, not the state attorney general, all of that stuff. And in fact, to give you a perspective, the sheriff, if there is an ill order issued by the court, the sheriff does not have to enforce that order. If he is functioning in his constitutional capacity, if he's functioning as an administrative officer, then he's got to jump through every hoop that somebody up the line tells him to jump through. And many of the court decrees are unconstitutional. They violate people's rights and property.
So, Ron, let me interrupt you for a second. So, how is it? Is it just the very knowing of the sheriff that he has taken the oath to uphold the Constitution? That when someone comes to him and says, this is an unlawful order, and that he would therefore know, just because he is educated in the law and the Constitution, that he would therefore have the authority and take the action to not uphold that order? I mean, is it just his education and his knowing, and that's what separates him from a basically a corporate sheriff versus?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
There's an old saying, and probably you've heard it most of your life: ignorance of the law is no excuse. Well, that applies to law enforcement personnel as well. If they're to implement the righteous, and I'm going to use the word the righteous application of law, then they better dang well know what the law is and what it is not. You know, it's I've been in the gold business for the better part of my adult life. And I remember years ago, and I had a mentor. Boy, this guy was something else. He said, Ron, two things you need to learn about gold mining. He said, to know where gold is and know where it's not. And the same thing has to do with the application of law. You better know the law, because if you don't, somebody's going to get hurt. And I don't necessarily mean physical. I'm talking about through unlawful court orders or summons or whatever. Also, the sheriff has the authority, if it deems necessary under the circumstance, he can arrest a judge. In fact, he has the authority to arrest all of the judges if they're in criminal activity. And let me share something with you folks, they are. They're involved in RICO, racketeering. So, you know, people don't like me to say that, and especially judges and attorneys, but it's a fact. The criminality that goes on, and Kathleen, you are well aware of that issue. And
Well, I am, and in the Fourth Judicial District Court in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and that district is over 3 counties. The judge is he hasn't recused himself on a case, and his uncle was a murderer on a case, and he went free for 4 months without any arrest by the sheriff's department, any intervention by the Fourth Judicial District Court. And it took myself going on to a radio program and bringing this up. And 2 days later, this murderer turned himself in. But it was only to take the pressure off of the court system, because this judge is running for election. And I mean, it's so criminal, as you call it, a criminal syndicate, and we are seeing it right in our faces here.
Well, that's why we the people have to start standing up. And you hear me say this probably every time that I'm on the air here. But if we don't, folks, it isn't going to get fixed.
No.
Criminals don't police themselves. They don't make wrongs right. They have no incentive for that. Corruption breeds corruption. Bad apple ruins a whole box of apples, so to speak. And if we want safe streets and we want crime off the streets, then we better take a stand and make sure that we have an idea what the law. And folks, I hear this all the time, and it frustrates me to no end. Well, I don't know the law. And my immediate answer is, then go to the internet and read up a little bit on it. You don't have to know it all. You just start from the basis. Because I'll tell you something, folks, law is intoxicating. You get a little bite and taste of what true law is, it's exciting. And you want more, and it spurs on. And that's the way God made us. We're made to have a righteous heart. And that means a moral value that we do and strive. My early years, I was taught that everyone tries to do the right thing. And boy, did I get an awakening in that arena. I got slapped around so bad I didn't know which end was up. And it's all from my perception of what I've been taught. And young minds are open and eager to absorb what they're being taught. I've got a big plaque on my wall out in the corridor. And it says, the philosophy of the schools today will be the philosophy of government tomorrow.
Yes.
So you teach kids ill today, it's going to end up right in the forefront and on the front page of every political paper and news media out there.
Yes.
It's coming, folks. And so go ahead.
Well, and just getting back to the sheriffs too, is that, if we don't have a sheriff in our community who is constitutionally based, then we have to step up and put someone in who is, bless you, because it doesn't just happen out of thin air, as you're saying, and I think the most basic thing, and I think it's something that most people just can't grasp, it's taken me a very long time, is that we are born sovereign and no man rules over us. That is between ourselves and our creator. And that if any man, like the so-called legal system today, attempts to impose statutes and rules upon us, that is a master-slave system. It is that simple. It doesn't go beyond that. And all we have to do is stand up in our knowing that no man has power over us. And that's one of the reasons why I don't wear a mask, because that's a slave posture. And I refuse to be a slave to anyone.
Well, that's why we are sovereigns without subjects. In other words, I shared this several weeks back, but you can govern you far better than I can or anyone else. The same with me. I have control, and that's because we have a free and sovereign will that God gave us. But with that free and sovereign will, we have two things, accountability and responsibility. And if we're not willing to exercise those, the sovereign part of us is virtually useless, simply because it has to be applied, and it has to be exercised, and it has to have forethought about what is cause and effect. And that's one of the things that I greatly appreciate about my mother and dad, is the fact they taught us kids to think and to reason and look at not only now, but what happens in the future with the decisions that I make today. And it has benefited me my entire life. Excuse me. So
Bless you.
here we are back to the issue of the sheriff. The sheriff's position dictates in most instances the quality of undersheriffs that he has and his deputies, and to make sure that he polices those very adequately and thoroughly. And but getting back to my sheriff friend there, he had to spend all of this time trying to generate money or to save money, depending upon what the situation is, when in fact he should be doing his sheriff's job, whatever. Now he's become a financial manager on this element, and on this other side he's neglecting his sheriff's job. And I don't say that in criticism of him, but that was the situation that he was put in. And I've had long talks with him. He accompanied me to a number of patent seminars that I did, and so we had long drives out through the Nevada desert, and really got to know each other well after he left the sheriff's office. And I remember one time going out east of Tonopah, Nevada, and there's 200 miles of nothing out there. There isn't even a tree out there. But anyway, we're driving along, And, you know, those roads, some of them are 20 miles long, straight stretch. And he looked over at me and he said, I got to tell you something. I said, what's that? He said, I wish I would have known then what I know now that I've learned from you about the elements of law. He said, I would have conducted my sheriff's department totally different. And that really touched my heart, because I'm getting through to somebody, you know. And he's not one to speak unless he really thinks it through. But to get him back to the power of the sheriff, if he doesn't know what he's doing or he's on that administrative side, folks, the responsibility is you and I to correct him in that. Oh, I can't talk to the sheriff. He, you know, he has handcuffs and a gun. You're missing the point, because he needs to be guided, and by that guidance, he gains strength, because he knows that these people are watching him and that he's doing the right thing. And when he is, you got to praise him for that, not always shaking our finger at him. And that's a real bad habit. A lot of people are so used to pointing fingers, they forget that there's 4 fingers pointing back. Maybe we need to clean up our backyard. So anyway, that's not to get off on the deep end of that. But the other thing that the sheriff is so critical at, and that is properly deploying his deputies. Maybe I shared this story early on, but we had a former sheriff years ago that was a Fruit Loop, I'm telling you. And I went to high school with this guy, and he worked his way up to, was elected as sheriff. And during his tenure, he had his sheriff's department vehicles parked behind an overpass or up this dark, narrow road or whatever, looking to write tickets. The whole premise of his sheriff deal was for the purpose of getting as many tickets to bring money into the county as he could. And it got to be a standing joke. Every morning the sheriff's officers and the sheriff would meet at a local donut shop. And it got to be a standing joke that, well, if you want to get an emergency, dial 911 donut. And that got around to the sheriff. But anyway, I happened to stop by there one morning, and there were 4 or 5 sheriff's cars, and they were way in the back end laughing, and which, that's fine. But as he came forward, I looked up and I said, Dan, I said, how you doing? And looked down at me, and I said, I want to talk to you a minute. Well, those deputies crowded around me and put their thumbs in their belt and their elbows out like, you know, boy, you better not say the wrong thing. And I said, I want to talk to you about your up and coming election. And I said, the budget that is being proposed for the sheriff's department. And he said, well, what about it? And I said, you're never going to win that election. And he said, what do you mean? I said, because your whole sheriff philosophy is off in the ditch. I said, do you think the people in our county are going to vote for this financial bond levy for the purpose of funding you when you're out there trying to take care of writing traffic tickets rather than creating an atmosphere to where the people feel safe? I said, if you think that bird's going to fly, I said, I'm sorry to tell you, that proposal went down 80% to 20%. And the people of the county said, we're not putting a dime into this until you change your policy. So the reason that I bring that up, folks, we need to be watching the sheriff, not from a point of always being critical, but help him. There's an old saying, the largest ship in the world is steered by literally a small rudder. We can be that rudder to help him. If we're there to bash him, then we better shut up and move to the next county. But our responsibility, civic responsibility, is to help our sheriff and do the best we can with what means that we do have to help him do his job better, because we're all involved in one fashion or another. And so this issue of his policy and directing his underlings is another issue that I think that you folks need to keep in the forefront of your mind, that with the intent of helping him, not from damaging him, but to try to help him. And you'll find, I've seen many sheriffs who have changed their attitude and their policies based upon the public input. So what I'm trying to share with you, and let me share something with you, a little bit of a sidebar, if you please. But I'm an avid student of my Bible, and I'm not saying that to pat Ron on the back at all. But it's very interesting. God gives us 3 principles to communicate by. And I'm telling you, if you exercise these, it works almost every single time. Number 1, is it the right time? I've been a marriage counselor for about 30 years, and I know this works. But get back to the point. The second thing, is it done in kindness? And the third one is it necessary? And when you use those 3 principles, God honors it. And that communication, when there's times of conflict, are settled down to a manageable level, you know. But boy, you come in swinging a hatchet, of course the other person's gonna. And when you damage, you know, a person's ego, not that it shouldn't be corrected, but when you go to literally to damage it, you're a rough road to hoe, let's put it that way. So I'm just saying that when we communicate with your sheriff, come with the attitude, Sheriff, we want to help. And let him know that there's just more than one. Not there's anything wrong with just one coming, but let him know that we're here to help. How can we help? Ask him. Don't just come along and tell him and tell him and tell him and scold him and scold him. What is it that we can do to help? So those are bit pieces there that can be very productive. The other thing that we need absolutely to change, and that is the issue of the sheriff needs to be the one to address the grand jury. And boy, folks, I can't tell you how important that aspect is. And maybe I shared this before. If I did, I don't mean to be repetitive, but it's important to bring it up again. It used to be under common law that the prosecutor and a defense lawyer were after the same thing. And that was the truth. Irregardless of what transpired in it, they were after the truth. The fact and the circumstances either substantiated that or exonerated a person of their innocence or guilt. Now what we have under administrative law, and it's not law, administrative statutes and codes that we're calling law. And that is the fact the prosecutor wants to prosecute and convict no matter whether that person is guilty or not. Boy, you talk about a criminal syndicate. That's very dangerous, number one, and tremendously damaging, number two. And the defense attorney now, instead of him defending the person for the sake of and getting to the truth, all he wants to do is get him off. So his law practice gets clients, oh, he got such and such off, and the prosecutor, I want to go up the ladder and become the state attorney general, so I get all of these convictions under my belt. And here the defendant is standing in the middle of this with all of this chaos going on in a case, and he's not really adequately represented or protected in any fashion in a case. And you might think, well, you know, so what? Put yourself in that position. What if it's you? What do you do? How do you try to handle that situation when both parties have an ulterior motive and self-seeking for their own benefit? There's a saying in the Marine Corps, it's called mind over matter. They don't mind and we don't matter. So that's kind of what you have in that scenario. The other thing is that laws are to be made by the state legislature, but a lot of the laws that come back down from the state legislature violate our constitutionally protected God-given rights. It is then the power of the sheriff that can step in and put a stop to any implication of that ungodly law. Because, God gave man dominion over the entire earth. I don't know whether he gave a judge anywhere at any time dominion over the earth, or the state legislature, or the Congress, or the Senate, wherever you want to point your finger here. So it's really important that we understand what the power of the sheriff is and what it is that we can do to help him to do a better job. So anyway, getting back to the issue of the grand jury, being the sheriff's office in many instances, and should be in most instances, the lead investigator into what it is that is presented by the facts and the witnesses and all that is involved in that. To be able, he then should take that information to the grand jury and say, here's what our investigation found. But what is happening, and has happened for a long time, the prosecutor takes that information, will manipulate it to suit his chances of increasing the conviction on the thing, and therefore the victim is victimized again by this fraudulent activity of the prosecutor's office. The sheriff needs to be the one that addresses the grand jury. And when the grand jury issues an indictment down that there's sufficient evidence, whatever, that evidence in most instances will be very credible evidence. And sometimes there's some glitches and some wrongdoing by personnel. But again, the grand jury needs to be in contact with the sheriff, and the sheriff in contact with, because the grand jury can investigate the sheriff and all his underlings. You can investigate the judge, etc. The grand jury is a tremendously powerful entity and is totally independent of any government entity. It's we the people.
Ron, do you see any places where the sheriff has intervened and participated in the grand jury process?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you very well. Say again.
I wonder, have you seen where a sheriff has actually intervened?
No, no. And that's what he should be doing. He should go to the prosecutor and said, I'll give you the relative facts and the indictment issued down. It isn't the prosecutor's place to go. That's what they do under administrative statutes and codes. But that is not law. And they want to implement law. They want to pretend it's law. They want to tell you it's law. You hear this term all the time, and you've heard me say, angers me to the bone. Well, we're going to enforce the rule of law. The rule of law means that the rule is being treated like a law, whether it is or is not. And then 99% of the time, it is not law. It is corporate rules and regulations. So that's what we're dealing with.
Wow. Well, it seems like we have a long ways to go until we can clean the hen house, get all the stuff out so that we have something functioning.
Well, you hit on a very interesting point. If we don't, and I pray to God that your listening audience hears what I'm saying, not necessarily with your ears, but with your heart. And that is a fact. If we don't stand up and fix these problems that we're dealing with, it's going to get worse, folks. It ain't going to get better. And we're seeing a rapid down turn of the things that we used to look at as being somewhat stable. There are groups and individuals out there who want to destroy everything with this country, and you and I are included in that attempt to destroy.
Well, I'm seeing that where I am. Bless you. I've been told by numerous people that my life is in danger because of what I have revealed in the 4th Judicial District Court, because the cabal that's there, the number of judges involved, and all the others, all the way up to the governor, it's a serious situation, and many people don't want to stand up and make waves because they are afraid that they will be taken out. And I don't take it lightly to be told by many different people that that this is dangerous, what we're doing. But the thing is, Ron, it's dangerous to not stand up, because this is war against us, and we'll lose it quietly rather than at least taking a stab at standing for our sovereign rights. Is that not how you see it as well?
Well, and that's true. And the thing about that I want to emphasize on of what you just stated, there is a danger to us individually at this point. But I think it's prudent to ask the question, what is going to be the level of danger down the road? You know, you look at Germany and the history of Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, and all that. They were lied to. Oh my gosh, you surrender your guns, you'll have all of this freedom, and da-da-da-da-da-da. When they did, then they went to each household and said, we know you got guns, and if you don't give them, we're going to start to shoot this youngest child first. And in times they just murdered entire families. I don't take that kind of thing lightly, because we're seeing a repetitious of that trend, and I want to clarify that trend that we're seeing in our nation there today. But I also want to state for the record, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm concerned sometimes about the dying process, because sometimes diseases and physical conditions or mental can be pretty taxing. But I know if I die, where I'm going. So when God gives me an assignment to do, He gives us protection. And I can tell you, Kathleen, you are being watched over. Go read Psalms 91. God sends my angels to watch over you and to carry you so that thou shalt not stumble. And boy, how comforting that is to me. And so here again, I'm trying to get you folks to understand about how important this office of the sheriff is. And I want to say, I thank God for sheriffs, because things would be a whole lot worse without them. But I want to read you a couple things, if I may, that really are pertinent. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, and expects what never was and what will never be, Thomas Jefferson. Pretty profound statement, isn't it?
Yes.
We better get unignorant. In other words, get educated. The county sheriff has the duty to enforce the common law. Now, I want to stop there a minute and then I'll go on. Nowhere in law does it state that the county sheriff or his deputies are to enforce statutes and codes. Did you catch that? Nowhere in law does it state that. Now, because we have an administrative so-called government in our land here today, the city police are the ones that enforce statutes and codes. But they do it on the premise that it's law. And I can tell you from 50 years in law, it is anything but law. It's corporate rules and regulations being portrayed to you and I that it in fact is a law. Okay? The law which governs by God in the hearts of men. These are two constitutional or common law principles that guide in knowing the common law. Number one, and listen carefully, in order for these to be a crime, there must be an injured party. Okay? Now let me give you an example. You drive down the street, you come to a stop sign, there's no traffic coming anywhere, and you come to kind of a rolling stop. Just an example. You make the turn, and 15 seconds later you got a mobile gumball machine blinking in your rearview mirror. Who is the injured party? There isn't one, is there? And I could go on and on. I won't. But the point I'm making is that that's what law is to do. Law is to bring peace, not disharmony and confusion. And a lot of people don't understand that. They just want to use a forceful fist and get out my big thick ticket book and write them all. Number one, in order for there to be a crime, there must be an injured party, and the government in general cannot be an injured party. Did you get that? The government cannot be an injured party. Why not? Any thoughts on why the government can't be an injured party?
Well, because they're a corporation.
Exactly. How do we injure ourselves? If you're talking about the true government, you and I and every American here is the government. Hello? Some of this stuff, if it wasn't so pathetic, it'd be laughable. It really would. Number two, for every injury, there must be a remedy. Then its simplicity of God's law: do not kill, do not steal, do not injure, do not trespass. And we all know what those are. So the remedy of these things are not to do it. And those that breach the boundaries of these common law principles, then you can take action. But you got to do it on the basis that there's an injured party. Okay? Now, what signifies a sheriff from the police is the fact that police are code enforcement officers that answer to the political servant who has the power to fire. Did you get that? You're dealing with a corporation, like you mentioned a moment ago, Kathleen. The policemen in the city are all under this corporate entity structure. They're not under common law. Therefore, the sheriff will be as lawful as the knowledge of the people themselves. What did that just tell you? What was I saying early on about educating the sheriff and helping the sheriff? If we go in with ignorance, then he's going to function in most instances on a level of ignorance. Kind of scary in one fashion, isn't it? Boy, there are only 3 ways that a sheriff can be removed from office, and I want you to listen carefully or write them down. The people can vote him out. Number 2, an impeachment process, or an indictment by a grand jury of a crime committed by the sheriff. Other than that, folks, you can't get rid of a sheriff. So one of those 3 principles has to apply, and there has to be evidence to that effect. And usually, what has happened in the past, if we have a criminal syndicate relative to the sheriff's department, there's a federal investigator. That should not be, because the federal investigator is breaching the jurisdictional boundaries of the sheriff. The one who does not have a boundary that they're limited by is the grand jury. The grand jury can investigate anybody and bring an indictment against anybody, predicated upon the facts that are determined from the investigation. Okay. So the people need to stand behind the sheriff, and he needs to have access to the grand jury to get an indictment. The sheriff should not be going to the county prosecutor for an indictment at all, because the sheriff is the gatekeeper of the law. I like that. The gatekeeper of the law. I am totally amazed over and over how little attorneys and judges know about law. They know a lot about statutes and codes, and they know a lot about procedure. They know how to do research, and they know how to take your rights away from you and do it with a smile, with your money in their pocket. Kind of an amazing scenario. Sheriffs to keep their eye out for a committee of safety, because they're called COSs, which are exploding across America. All 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were members of a committee of society that are the most powerful tool that the sheriff can have, because they consist of we the people. What have I been talking about? You surround your sheriff and his deputies excuse me, with we the people, then in essence that they know that we know the law. And I think I shared this before, but I want to illustrate it again if I may. I'm the chairman of the largest mining district in the United States, called Jefferson Mining District. And years ago we had some issues with some of the deputies who did not know the law, didn't want to learn the law, couldn't care about the law. All they wanted to do was write tickets. And they started writing tickets for miners mining in the streams and whatever that they're allowed to do by grant of Congress. And so I went to one of our county commissioners, her name is Sandy Casanelli. What a sweetheart. She since has passed away. But I told her the dilemma. She said, and I asked her, I said, would you set up a meeting with the county commissioner? She said yes. So we all gathered for the courthouse. There's about 15, 18 of us, whatever there was. And we start up the steps on the thing. She stopped dead in her tracks. She turned around and put her hand on my chest. And she said, Ron, I got to tell you guys something. And still holding her hand on my chest, you know, and everybody's trying to adjust to the immediate stop. Still holding her hand on my chest, she turned around and she pointed from one end of that courthouse to the other. She said, I want you guys to know something. She said, everybody in that courthouse is scared to death of you miners. I said, what? She said, yes. She said, you guys are a topic of conversation on a daily basis within that courthouse. And I said, why? She says, because they now know that you guys know the law. And I'm telling you, the infringement on the miners from that day stopped. We didn't have any more ticket writing, gunsy people looking to fill a quota. And I think you get the point. But we the people need to be the support of our sheriff folks and let them know, to help them to make the right decisions. And they face some dangerous challenges a lot of times on a daily basis. And sometimes things happen, but they're trained. I think there's a lot more training that can be done. My son is a black belt in karate, and years ago had an instance on a national level to where it took 7 of these police officers to bring this guy down. And my son looked at that and he just shook his head. He said, Dad, they're so ill-trained, it's pathetic. If you're properly trained, you can render a man incapacitated in his ability to fight you back with 2 moves, all it takes.
Oh.
And then he told me, and I've taken karate, but I'm not I haven't done it formally outside. I was trained at in the Marine Corps. But the point that I'm making is the very fact that they need to be trained the best that our money can buy to train them. Because you may be an innocent party coming out of a building mistaken for an escaped fugitive and get shot or badly wounded or whatever the case may be. And I'm just trying to give you different scenarios of things because a lot of times they got to make a split-second decision. The sheriffs need to have a proper education. That's what we're talking about here. And the support by, again, we the people. Sheriffs standing with us, we the people. It is a necessity to have an armed posse. How many times have you heard lately of a sheriff's office convening a posse? The last time that I remember that was when the Cowden family was murdered up above my home in the Applegate there. And then there was another, on that occasion, and one other several years later, that some people were out picnicking way up in the mountains, and a baby, a 2.5-year-old child, wandered off and they couldn't find it. And I'm telling you, the posse went by our ranch, trailer load after trailer load after trailer load of posse volunteers and whatever to try to find that boy. They did not find him through the posse and the sheriff department, but there's an irrigation ditch that comes around a ranch just across the valley from where my mom and dad's ranch was. And that boy come walking down that ditch bank, and he had his diaper on his head. He was crying and whatever, and the guy was out irrigating, and he heard that baby crying. Saved his life because the boy was dehydrated. He was gone 3 days and 3 nights. I mean, we got bear there, we got cougars in our country, we got bobcat, lots of them, and whatever. So all I'm trying to share with you is that in many cases they're very much a benefit, but you won't find a sheriff that calls for a posse anymore. And the reason for that is the cause of that is attorneys who want to sue on behalf of any kind of mistake that a sheriff's office makes. They're sue happy, they're sue crazy, and they do it all for the wrong reason. So, okay. Kathleen, did you have any questions or comment?
Well, I guess the thing that stands out so much to me is that it's like in any relationship, right? We know the person as well as they know themselves. And so I can kind of take that and apply that to the sheriff. The sheriff knows law as much as we know it. And so it's a relationship that must happen of holding a sheriff accountable, and for our own selves to hold ourselves accountable and be responsible. But those are the underlying tenets of common law from what we have been discussing is our accountability and our responsibility. And if we blindly rely upon an elected official to do the right thing, they're only going to do the right thing if we are participating in being accountable and responsible in that jurisdiction of that sheriff.
Well,
it's very close relationship.
Very good point. One of the things too that is a bad mistake, I think, and I'm speaking for me, that too many sheriffs get politically involved. Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever. He has a fiduciary duty and responsibility to stay out of that arena. And the reason being that he's there to represent the Democrats, the Republicans, the liberals, the independent, whatever term you want to put on it. And people get real hot and bothered and very judgmental on political issues. That and religion are the two probably the hottest buttons out there. And so as a result of that, if he stays out of that arena, then in essence nobody can say, well, you did this or you supported them and you neglected me, and all of this garbage that starts flowing downhill that is not necessary for any reason at all. Why are we bothering with that garbage? And so I'm just saying that our sheriff needs to be a well-rounded individual, but I'm going to quote something from my Bible that is God ordained, and that is that for us to have people in positions of leadership amongst us or over us or whatever the case you want to put on it, must have a servant's heart. It doesn't matter what his education is as a number one priority. It doesn't matter his political affiliation. You see where I'm going here? You
Yes.
start down that road, you really muddy the waters. Because what we need to look at, and we need to have interviews and numerous meetings, not one or two before an election. And we claim, well, I'm too busy to go to that. Well, then you're too busy to help stop the crime, so don't complain when it comes your way.
And Ron, we can apply the same thing to our judges.
Oh, absolutely.
These judges,
Absolutely.
it's not political, it's not party, but they have to have a servant's heart. They can't be biased. They can't be in a political cabal. They must represent the people. And so we have a big responsibility before us
That
to
is correct.
to clean out all of this scum that has come into office because we haven't been accountable and responsible as we need to be. I mean, truly, we have no one to look at but our own selves, our own fault for not participating in a system in which we are the sovereign people. We have been lazy.
Boy, you said a mouthful. The problems of this nation and in and amongst the people is caused by we the people have allowed it to happen.
Yes.
We have allowed it to happen. I want to tell you a little short story, if I might, because I gotta go here in a little bit. I got a luncheon appointment. But that is that uh, I find it interesting that when we get involved in these kinds of scenarios, there seems to be always somebody who wants to run it off the track, you know, and I'll call it saboteurs for the sake of a better word. And you find that in church groups, you find it in PTA meeting, you find it in the city council meeting, you find it in the county, you find it at the state, all the way to Washington. It goes from A to Z. Somebody in there wants to run the train off the track. But it's going to be very interesting to see what people do with the information that we now have. This internet is the greatest library in the world. I mean, my golly. You want to learn everything about bugs and microorganisms to space travel, it's all there on that computer. Amazing thing. I'd like to bust it once in a while, but never. But it's really a fascinating tool. But we have to decide where we want to go as a nation. And I want to encourage all of you to think before you speak, to look before you step, and ask yourself the question, what happens or what will happen or what might happen if I do this decision? And you know, the Bible gives us a great deal of instruction about being careful where we step. And what brought that to mind, when I was being trained in the Marine Corps for Vietnam, the training was tremendously emphasized. Be careful where you step because of booby traps and landmines and all of this stuff. And I'm trying to teach that to my grandson, who's sharp as a tack. I mean, but the principle, every decision that you and I make has a cause and effect. It doesn't matter where you want to turn, every decision has an effect, either a positive or a negative one. And sometimes we don't know, but God gave us an intuition as well as a conscience. And when we trust Him to make the right decision, He promises in His Word that He will direct thy path and shine a light, let our light shine. So as we close here today, Kathleen, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. Thank all of your listening audience for putting up with me. But I really enjoy this time that we can converse on things that matter. I don't ever want to bring things to the listening audience that has no relative value anywhere. So if I ever do that, you can throw stones at me. So
I don't think we have to worry about that, Ron. It's always a pleasure, and we look forward to our next opportunity to learn more about our.
thank you very much. And Happy New Year to all of you out there. So,
Thank you.
okay.